If you would have asked me 5 years ago what the on-trend brewing thing would be in 2021, I would have guessed something with the letters I, P, and A. And I would have been wrong. Laugh all you want, but hard seltzer is here to stay. And Imperial Yeast's new seasonal strain W04 Paramount can help brewers get the most out of their water fermentations. A clean and aggressive fermenter, Paramount will produce an excellent seltzer with low fusel alcohols, plus it's gluten-free. If you've tried making seltzer with standard ale or lager strains, you know the struggle. And Imperial Yeast is here to help with W04 Paramount. Learn more about this novel strain at imperialyeast.com and pick up your W04 Paramount before it's too late. Designing recipes is one of my favorite aspects of brewing. I'm not a very artistic person, but putting a recipe together gives me a sort of creative outlet. As all brewers know, beer is made with 4 primary ingredients, one of which is malted barley. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and on this episode, I'm joined by contributor Andy Carter to chat about a couple different base malts, particularly as they pertain to brewing one of my favorite styles, German Pilsner.
This experiment, I really like this one a lot because I think it goes to, some fundamentals of brewing. We play around with yeast and hops and then fermentation techniques, but let's go right to the source, to the, one of the primary ingredients in beer, which is the malt.
Yeah, and when you think about styles, most pale lagers in general, but styles like German Pilsner, I mean, it is often made with a single malt, and there is a malt called Pils Malt that is, made for these beers. And so choosing the right malt is viewed by many as being very important. Without a doubt, German Pilsner is in my top 5 favorite beer styles of all time. And one reason for that is because I love how simple it is. And, Pilsner malt is known for imparting a nice bready malt character. I love that stuff. Can other base malts be used instead? That's what we're going to be discussing in this episode. All right, if you are a fan of this show and would like to receive a reward for your support, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Coming up later this month, April of 2021, is everyone's favorite brewcaster, host of the Brewing Network podcast, Dr. Homebrew, and the session, our friend Jason JP Petros. If you know JP, you have probably laughed with and at JP. This is going to be a very fun, I have a feeling, entertaining session. JP got to start off at more beer before bouncing over to the Brewing Network, where he's made a huge name for himself in the brewing scene. Again, I have little doubt this is going to be a really fun session. If you'd like to be a part of it, be sure to make your pledge at patreon.com/Brewlosophy by Friday, April 23rd, 2021. All past sessions are stored on our private Facebook page, so patrons can go back and watch them whenever they like. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts that allow you to rate and review shows, we really would appreciate it. By doing so, those who haven't heard of us yet can more easily find the show. Plus, we really value knowing what you all think about us. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at great prices with super fast shipping. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. We got an absolute ton of feedback about our recent Brews Views episode, so I'm going to keep going down the list of these. This Brews Views episode was the one where we discussed our opinions on traditional brewing methods. Listener Dan Gruber wrote in with this. You talked about 60 minutes as a primary increment for mashing and boiling. I have no way to prove it, but I think the first, quote, cheap and available timepieces were hourglasses. So medieval brewers could time something repeatedly in their brewery or home with an hourglass, and us modern brewers changed it to 60 minutes. They didn't have stopwatches and iPhones. They initially didn't even have pocket watches. The other way could have been the village clock once it was invented, as they sounded every hour or even quarter hour, and that would have been easy to reference for a small brewer in a village. To me, that makes so much sense as to why we, for whatever reason, settled on a 60-minute mash rest.
This is actually great. I like the history, I like the romanticism of it, that there was only one way to tell time and everything. And it makes sense to me. I think it all jives. One of it is, I think 60, at least, let's say, like looking at 60 minutes for me, at least 60 minutes on a mash, it comes from that's a nice number. I think we tend to think in hours. Maybe that comes from the fact that hours were always announced on some type of schedule. But I think I would say just slightly different on the boiling side is that 60 minutes seems to be like the maximum of extracting IBUs, and I think that's why a lot of people set it on 60. But I like this history at lesson too, and that's probably why traditions exist like this, why they make sense.
Yeah, and maybe there wasn't a 60-minute requirement back in the earlier days of brewing for the boil, because they did not understand isomerization back then.
No, of course not. Yeah,
they understood if they threw hops in for a longer time that the the beer ended up being more bitter. I mean, I get that, but yeah, why we set that's kind of rabbit hole type stuff. Is why where did we get 60 minutes? What is 60 minutes anyways? What is a minute? Yeah. But I do appreciate you writing in, Dan. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. Drop us a note on social media. Who doesn't love a good, crisp, pale lager? It is probably what I end up drinking the most with my friends and neighbors. Low alcohol, overall light flavor, super refreshing. I absolutely love the stuff. Well, listener Tom Forelli from Loaded Dragon Brewing sent me an American lager he made called Multiple Stab Wounds that I shared with my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Beer review. Oh, interesting. Strange.
I like it. It's very good.
It's got a weird taste at the end. It's like almost lemony.
Yeah, a little lemon. I believe so.
Snap. Did we just agree on something?
It kind of smells like it too.
But there's not a hard fizziness, carbonation, I believe you call it. So it's kind of tastes to me like it's a little bit
flat.
Yes, thank you.
That's
I was
the word?
looking for that word. Flat and lemony. Flemony.
Flabbity. It's not bad though.
No, it's not. I like a little more carbonation. That's all, stuff.
I mean, it just could have just happened, been sitting around.
Is that how it works?
Sure.
What are you, Bill Nye the Science Guy?
The more I'm drinking of it, the less I'm liking it though.
Well, the more I'm drinking it, the more I'm liking it. I'm not saying that just to be on opposite sides of you, dog.
Of course you are.
So obvious. It's good growing. I mean, anything that doesn't have a ton of flavor, we like.
True.
It doesn't have a ton of flavor, so we're gonna gravitate.
It doesn't have
towards
any
it.
kick at the end. Where it's hanging around.
No, it's just life. I like it. It has to be a pilsner. It has to be something close to what we like, or not. Dude, I learned a long time ago. If you just tag an or whatever to the end of everything, you're never wrong. Dude, this is totally a pilsner or whatever. It's all right.
Yeah, it's kind of pine sol tasting.
Pine sol? Have you drank pine sol?
No,
I believe the children are our future. I don't know what you mean by pine sol, and I have never drank pine sol. If you're talking about the pine sol smell,
yeah.
One could attribute that to elements of beer that we don't understand that they put into these things. I believe maybe even hops. Who knows?
Hops.
I like it.
Yeah, it's mediocre for me.
Well, I'm sure the person who made this beer is going to be brokenhearted to know that Tim, the learnedest man in the history of the world, it's not for him. He's going to be like, I'm not brewing this beer again if it's not for Tim. You did it, dude. You broke some.
All right. Mission accomplished.
Yeah, I like it. I would pour me a whole glass. I'd drink a whole glass.
All right. I would.
There we go. Then this is a win. We'll rate this on a scale of win and loss. This is a win for me.
All right. I feel like the guys were getting a bit too, overzealous on this review. I mean, I got absolutely no lemon at all from this beer.
That's funny.
Rather, the malt character was the most prominent thing to me. It tasted really nutty. I even wrote down that it was like bordering on kind of a peanut butter powder flavor, but it wasn't peanut butter. I kind of go off on my reviews sometimes. I really enjoyed this beer. I could have drank multiple Stab Wounds all day. The fact that Tim was kind of iffy on his preference for it, I thought he was going to love it. I'll tell you what, though, the coolest thing about this beer, as good as it was to me at least, the label on the can was rad. They're doing some cool stuff at Loaded Dragon Brewing.
That's cool. That's cool. Canning beer, that's coming more in vogue. I mean, pro brewer or home brewer. I mean, it's more and more people are doing it. So that's very cool. I love the style of beer because it's getting warmer out here in California. You can have a few of those outside. You're not going to feel it too much until maybe you stand up too quickly. But great style. I'm glad this would turned out well for you too. Yeah,
it was really good. And I kind of want to read a little bit about what Tom wrote about Multiple Stab Wounds. He calls it a craft American lager with an ABV of just about 5.5%. He used a local Connecticut maltster, so they're out of Connecticut, called Thrall Family Malt. I'd never heard of them. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. And he said the malt bill consisted of approximately 70% Pilsner malt, 10% two-row, so pale malt, and 20% 20% flaked corn. So a really nice grain bill for an American Pilsner. He said he used a pinch of glucoamylase enzyme in the mash because he really wanted to dry the beer out and make something light and crushable. And I think it worked, Tom. It was really tasty. He said the OG was 1048 and it finished at 1006. It was a really nice beer. And I have a feeling that characterful malt that I got in the beer, that real nutty, nice thing, is because of that craft malt that he used. And kudos to Thrall Family Malt, because that beer was really nice and tasty.
Awesome.
Well, if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we're back from this break, our focus will be on the base malts used to make German pills. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
In a world where the popular beers are packed full of various flavors, from the uber hoppy to those with any number of curious adjuncts, it can be easy to lose sight of the simple beauty that is German Pils. Often made with a rather short ingredient list, the type of malt used is viewed as being very important in how this style of beer turns out.
Yeah, so, we all on this podcast and everyone at home knows, beer primarily being made out of barley malt, and sometimes even just shortened just to malt. It's almost assumed you're talking about barley when you talk about malt.
Yeah.
And it's important. So, barley as a plant, it's grown, and then it's harvested, and then there's a process called malting. Now, at this point, it's a seed, right? It could be planted and then go back in. So what we're going to do in malting is make it useful for brewers. And, malting is a crazy cool subject. I think we sometimes neglect it as homebrewers. Oh, okay, we're just going to buy a sack of 2-row and we're off to the races, And it's cool nowadays. It's actually craft malts coming in. We had a beer reviewed that had craft malt in it, and we're seeing kind of a resurgence in like getting down to the base flavors of those malts. So it's cool to see that. And I think we'll necessarily talk about all those things on this podcast, but at least what is malt? How is it made? And then, why is it important for the beer? So in the process of malting, after this malt is brought into the green malt or the unprocessed barley is brought in, what we're trying to do is create enough enzymes on the barley so that these enzymes can be used during a mash to then create short chain sugars that yeast can consume. And how we're going to do this is we're going to essentially trick the barley into seeding to try to kind of plant itself and create a germination event and then create a little bit of a root and then do that. But we're going to arrest that. So when the malt comes in, it gets cleaned up. There's a lot of rocks, bugs, things like that. It gets it in, and it gets essentially warmed up with a little bit of water. So you kind of fake it into seeding, fake it into planting. Like, hey, I'm putting you in the ground and I want you to make a plant. And if we do this carefully and consistently with the right amount of water, it'll start to germinate. This germination process will also make some enzymes.
Yeah, exactly. And the even before the malting process and the harvesting and all of that, this is not an episode on craft malt, but I do think it deserves being pointed out that different maltsters, even from the big maltsters, the big commercial maltsters, even all the way down to craft maltsters, will use different varieties of barley. And that's one of the things that's really neat about the craft malt boom right now is that you've got places like Mecca who are going and using basically what I would kind of refer to as like heirloom varieties of malt that are absolutely, they are different than what you're getting from Weyermann or what you're getting from Briess. And that's awesome because it gives us more variety, but that is one of those things that can impact flavor as well.
Yes, yeah. So they have trade names. I've looked at this in the past. There'd be names you've never heard of, like Opal, and I can't remember them all off the top of my head. But there's all these whole list, and there's actually just so basically much like we have yeast strains. There's barley strains, right? They're not all just Chico yeast, right? There are many different ones, and we tend to see only a few because of how malt is produced because of the bigger houses. But the craft ones, they're playing around with whatever they want to play around with to derive new flavors.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. So when you want to start, we've started the malting process, you're germinating, and then during this whole thing, you're getting the malt granule or the barley granule to germinate, and then at some point we're going to arrest that. We're going to say, okay, enough water's been taken up, enough enzymes have been created, and then we're going to dry it. And this is where we start to go into different directions with barley, and I think this is important. So you can create what we call base malt, which is just lightly kilned, but when we kiln it, we're keeping those enzymes intact. And that's what's critical and why we talk about what base malt means. It means it's something that has enzymatic power.
Right.
And it's actually, frankly, it's amazing that this occurs, that the germination, the seed itself, can create the enzymes that will eventually consume it when we put it into a mash. I find that incredibly fascinating, and it's not something we're adding to it, right? It's all natural.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so cool too. I mean, there's so much about the brewing process that prior to science and understanding of biology and such that just feels like magic to me.
Yeah.
Like the fact that we made this thing work still blows my mind. As it relates to, there are various types of base malts. I mean, a lot of people kind of pass it up, but like Munich malt is a base malt. Vienna malt is a base malt. You can have malted rye that can act like a base malt. Malted wheat can be a base malt. So there are various types of base malts. The two most popular, arguably, are just your standard pale malt and your Pils malt. Now, the distinguishing factor there, you can have the same exact maltster make pale malt. In fact, most do make pale malt and Pils malt out of the same exact batch of malt. So you're getting the same the same variety of grain, of barley grain. You're getting the same germination process. All of that's the same. The distinguishing factor is the kilning, is the degree to which those malts are kilned. And when it comes to pale malt, generally, and Andy, I'm sure you can speak to this a little bit better than I can, but generally, pale malt is known to be kilned slightly darker, a bit more than Pils malt.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you look back at the history of brewing, beer, like Marshall said, we've only had the science for so long, but, we knew that barley, if it was sprouted, it would create a sweeter thing. It would create like a sweet cereal, so to speak. And then, you would have a color rating to it. And so initially malt was just over fires. It was kilned over fires and had a smoky character to it. It was probably a little darker, but they learned over time that, hey, if we kiln it a little less, or we modify these little things here and there in the malt house, we get a consistent color and a better mash, right? A more efficient mash. Again, everything has to go from mash efficiency and color rating and stuff. And then, there's glassware. So now you're seeing the beer. Imagine you're drinking beer for many years and then you never cared about its color, right? It was just a beverage. Right now with glass, you're seeing it. So you can control the kilning and then get more extract. And then, okay, now I really want the lightest possible thing. So we just dial in that temperature a little bit more. And that's with pale malt. And then we're saying, using the same base, pale malt, Pilsner malt, it's killed just a little bit darker, maintain that efficiency, but then you get a consistent color. And, we're going to talk today about, the difference of a few tenths of a Lovibond in our color rating for these two malts.
Yeah. And that's, so, you mentioned Lovibond. That's just the degrees Lovibond is a measure of the color of that brought about by kilning, right?
Yeah.
And so just to attach a number to it, I'm sure most brewers out there are well aware of this, but typically your pale malt is going to be kilned to about 3 to 3.5 degrees Lovibond, give or take another half a degree. Whereas your Pilsner malts are going to be kilned at much lower. I mean, I believe Briess kilns their Pilsen malt to 1.2 degree Lovibond.
Yeah.
That is arguably quite a bit lighter than the pale malt. Well, that kilning, understandably, is widely accepted to have an impact on the ultimate character of the beer. And when you consider using 100% of that malt, the expected differences would be things like, pale malt's going to have more of a toasty character. It's going to have maybe a little bit more, not caramely sweet, but kind of more of a toffee-like flavor to it, as compared to the more white bread or bread crust characteristics that is said to be accompanied by Pilsen malt.
Yeah. So I think, and that's also derived from the styles of beer we make with these, right? If you had come in and just said, okay, well, I want to make a pale ale malt or a pale ale beer or something like that, you'd want to use a more robust thing, something to stand up to the hops and play around that. On the other side of that, it makes sense. Okay, less color, maybe not necessarily less flavor, but a different flavor. I think that's key, is that with like a Pilsner malt, you're expecting maybe a crackery, maybe a little bit of a, like a wheat bread dough kind of thing. Whereas color would, you in your mind, and it makes sense, color drives flavor. And if you think about, after malting, if you were going to go make a caramel malt or a roasted malt, of course those have flavor. Those have tons of flavor, right? That's why we use them. Not only color, but flavor. So it makes perfect sense. And I think in general, it does play out that way. I think a great example of this is Mayer malt. It has a moderate amount of color, but it has tons of flavor.
Yeah.
And you're not getting that from crystal malt. You're not getting that. You're getting it from just base malt when you make, say, a British style ale.
Yeah. Yeah. And just another point that I want to make, because I feel like I don't get too hung up on lexicon and semantics and the things that people want to call stuff, but you often hear pale malt referred to as two-row. I do it sometimes. I mean, it pale two-row or two-row malt. Pils malt is also two-row. It's just not kilned as much. So pale malt is the more accurate, more descriptive term to describe this pale malt that we're talking about. There's also pale ale malt, which I believe is kilned slightly darker than pale malt and is kind of like the American. This is how I've heard it described. It's like the American version of a Mayer.
Yeah.
So if just for the sake of accuracy, if you hear two-row, typically people are referring to pale malt. And Pils is made with the same stuff. It's made with you can get 6-row malt, but for the most part, Pils malt is made with 2-row as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the case of Pils malt, like we said, it's killed at a little lower temperature. And you can see this actually. There's a relationship. It's a strong correlation. It's not perfect 1-to-1, but you get a little more efficiency out of and more enzymatic reactions from lower killing temperatures because you haven't killed off those enzymes. So when we talk, we mentioned why is it base malt? It's the thing that's going to drive the mash a certain way. You can essentially with base malt convert more than the base malt itself. You can convert other grains that don't have as much of an enzymatic activity. Caramel malts and things like that. So you get full, complete conversion of your mash. And especially when you use cereal adjuncts, in German Pilsner, not so much in the adjuncts, but say you're going to switch to an American light lager, maybe you use some corn or something that doesn't have any enzymatic properties. You need that base malt to pump through and convert all those longer chain sugars into something fermentable by the yeast.
Yeah, exactly. You think about, I had a conversation with someone years ago that I always think back on. We were talking about, this was before the experiment that we're going to talk about here in a minute, before the experiments that I was doing on my own. It's really easy in brewing to just kind of accept the information that's there. And the nice thing about it is it's not going to hurt you. One of the things that I just accepted hook, line, and sinker was that pale malt is for ales. Pils malt was for lagers. And one of the great kind of, I mean, I'm not sure how accurate it is these days, but kind of this idea that I had, a rule of thumb that a buddy of mine shared with me was, if you've ever made a blonde ale, low hop, you're typically using pale malt in that. And you've ever tasted that next to like a Pilsner or an American lager, that's the difference that pale malt and Pils malt contribute. A part of the difference that you're tasting is the type of malt that's used. And again, organoleptically speaking, pale malt is going to contribute more of a darker bread, darker toast. It's not extreme by any means.
Yeah.
But it's expected to contribute more of those richer malt flavors. And I actually feel like malty is a good descriptor for pale malt, because that's what I think of when somebody says, "Oh, it's malty," is I think of pale malt, that kind of richer, still pale, but a darker toast than, say, just white bread,
Yeah.
Whereas Pils malt, like you said, I get crackery and white bread. Now, there is one thing about using high amounts of Pils malt, and I wonder if you can speak more to this, because I don't quite understand. I understand that, there's this issue, this concern that people have of dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, when using a high amount of Pils malt and having to boil longer because of that. But the reason for that is because of the lower kilning. It results in higher levels of SMM, which is the DMS precursor, being in the malt.
Yeah. So I think this is a common thing. It's in a lot of books, especially textbooks about brewing. And I think I'll just say that in my personal experience of brewing with many different Pilsner malts and brewing with malt in general, is that it's very hard to drive these things. The SMM and these precursors, they come out from the malting process, as you mentioned. And, these will lead to DMS, or dimethyl sulfide, the kind of cooked vegetable, kind of corn kind of thing aroma that some people describe in beer. We've done some experiments. I've had some friends do these kind of forced trials where they try to really force DMS to occur. I think modern maltsters have figured out how to minimize this and really not get it to show up in their beer. I think you have to try very hard to do it. And then the other side of it is there's people that are very sensitive to it as well. So even if it is in very minute quantities, it can affect some people. I definitely have people in my homebrew club that, when they have a pilsnery kind of pale beer, they're getting a little bit of that character in their beer. It is in the style. It is, it's maybe not preferred in many times, but it's a part of it. Sometimes in very small quantities, there's kind of a sulfury kind of matchstick kind of aroma to it, I think some people say as well. So, your mileage may vary. I think in general, maltsters know that this is a problem, and they've done a lot to eliminate it. So I think it's harder to get these days, but it's just something to watch out for. And that's why, I'm never boiling with the lid on, and that's how you get rid of it. You boil for long enough with the lid off, you should not have a problem. And I just don't think it's there as much as it used to be in malt in general.
Yeah, we have tried for years to produce a beer with noticeable levels of DMS. I happen to be one of those people, at least based on my own experience with flavor standards, one of those people who just happens to have a sensitivity to DMS. When we use the flavor active DMS flavor standard and dosed it, you can read the experiment about that if you want over at the website. I was one of the people who was consistently able to pick out the DMS beer, and we did kind of a lower saturation of it. And there were people who had no clue; they could not tell it apart. I just happened to be the guy who was like, "Dude, it's that one." Every single time in my triangle test, I got it right. I was never wrong. I have never, outside of Rolling Rock, I have never tasted that character in beer. Now, what I have tasted, and the reason I'm focusing on this is because we are talking about Pils malt. I have tasted Pils malt character, and I have a feeling, or a hunch, that people who are used to beers made with pale malt, your blonde ale, your pale ale, your IPA, aren't used to Pils malt flavor. They perceive that. They've heard somebody say corn or cooked vegetables, and they perceive that crackery Pils malt thing as being so unique that it doesn't fit their scheme, right, for what malty should taste like. And so they nail it as an off flavor, and then they attach what they heard somebody else say to it, which is DMS, right, which is the corny flavor, when really that's the character that you're looking for in that beer on some level. Yeah.
And I think that's important, is that its flavor is such a complicated topic. We kind of use it kind of just as a between brewers and stuff as a reference point, but we're all tasting everything in our unique way, right?
Exactly.
So if you say this beer definitely has DMS, and someone's never had a reference standard where you're literally pouring DMS into the beer and then smelling it and then drinking it, it's very tough to relate, right? I think diacetyl is the other one that's very common, where there's such a range of organoleptic, appearance on your own palate. You're sensitive, you're not sensitive, you get it this way, you get it that way. You only get in certain styles of beer. So, just take that with a grain of, grain of malts. And then the best way is really breaking out the standards. And know the standards can be expensive, or it can be hard to find. I would recommend, if you want to really nail I would say the big offenders, DMS and diacetyl, within your club's kind of ecosystem of knowing what you're tasting and who's tasting what, is to get those two precursors. There's many websites that sell them. Again, they're a little bit expensive, but you can make them go throughout the whole club. Pour a couple liters of each beer and try that blind triangle test. That would be the best way. And you're going to find out what you actually can and can't taste.
Yeah. And remember, when you're doing those things, this is kind of an aside, but when you are doing flavor standard samples, you 100% know that it's in there, and usually you're dosing it to a level that is far beyond what you're typically getting in beer. So if you can tell them apart, but you're like, boy, that wasn't very much, chances are you're not actually picking it up in beer.
Exactly.
We can go on forever talking about the subjectivity of beer evaluation, but to get back to malt, because of the DMS thing, it's often recommended when brewing with a majority of Pils malt, like you said, Andy, to boil for 90 minutes and also to make sure you keep that lid off, have good airflow, so that you can get that steam away, because that's where that DMS is going to reside, and so you can get that off there. With pale malt, you don't hear that very often. Your 60-minute boils just fine. You don't have to worry too much about DMS, at least from the malt contribution of the malt. So, well, let's spend a minute talking a little bit about German Pils in general as a style.
Yeah, so German Pilsner, I think in the United States, we're kind of seeing a lager kind of revolution or comeback for lagers. And so a lot of breweries have something like a German Pilsner on there. And like we said earlier, these recipes can't get any more simple. They just become kind of a technical skill set thing. And it's when you really want to dial it in and get the last few percent in your beer. So, base malt, like we're going to talk about today, 100% of a base malt, maybe some acidulated malt if you really need it, maybe 1% there, here or there for your mash pH. A lot of people move to Weyermann. I think Weyermann is the big name in the industry for base malts of German varietals. And of course, because it's delicious, why wouldn't you use it? But if you're trying to stretch your buck, we're going to look at Briess today, but there's plenty of other places that are making a low kilned malt. Again, the low kilning, we're going to get into the experiment results, of course, but the primary driver here is the color, because this beer is supposed to be very light in color. Light and refreshing is kind of the name of the game here. And then you're going to find a German hop. I really like Hallertau. I really like Tettnang. And then you kind of just sit on one hop, and that's what you're going to use for the rest of it. You're going to have a pretty sizable bittering charge, 30 to 50 IBUs, depending on how bitter you want it to go. And then some tail end, from anywhere from 30, 15, Whirlpool additions, and then how hoppy you want it to be. And then clean yeast. Lager yeast is usually what you want to use. There's a few strains there, but many have had success with even a hybrid yeast strain or at ale temperatures. You're probably not going to get the same character you would. And then on the water side, you're going to want, I think, a water that's a little more minerally. And I've had a debate with a lot of people about this because I was actually living in Berlin, Germany for a few months in undergrad. And I remember distinctly that the German Pilsners had a very pronounced water flavor, very minerally, and that really drove the bitterness much higher, in my opinion. And it made a very specific character. Really, it made each brewery taste unique and not just generically German Pilsner.
I like how you use the term minerally as opposed to higher sulfate, because I that's my experience as well, is that the overall mineral composition of the water really does contribute to, in my opinion, to what I'm looking for in a good German Pils. Now, for me, that just so happens to be a high mineral, higher sulfate to chloride ratio water profile, because I really want to amplify that crispness. And the two ways, really the three ways that you do that when brewing this style is bitterness. German Pils is not for the faint of heart on the bitterness. It's not going to be an IPA, but it will absolutely have that nice crisp bite if you brew it right. Yeah, exactly. An assertive bitterness. And so there's that, but then that water profile helps to amplify that. And in my experience, if you don't get your mineral profile right in the water, you're either going to get too harsh of a bitterness from the hops, from the same amount of hops that you would normally use, or it's going to mute that bitterness too much and make the beer almost more Bohemian Pilsner-esque. And to me, that's one of the biggest differences, that and the hop choice, right? Obviously, German Pils, noble hops. My absolute favorite's Tettnang. That's like one of my top 3 favorite hop varieties of all time. I love that stuff. And then traditionally you're pitching a lager yeast, fermenting it cool and all of that. Do you ever make a German Pils with pale malt? I think the Germans would tell you hell no and laugh you right out of the pub.
Well, we're going to find out here in a minute about experimenting with both a more Pilsner-like malt and more base malt. And, it'll be interesting to see these results.
Yeah. I've never actually made a German Pils with just pale malt, but a while back I had a Pils brew day planned and only realized on that day that I had barely any Pilsner malt left. Not wanting to waste time running to the homebrew shop, I substituted around 95% of the grain bill with pale malt. By the time the beer was ready, I'd completely forgotten about this and wasn't reminded until the keg was almost empty. That beer was fantastic, and I completely forgot it wasn't made with Pils malt, and it tasted like a Pilsner to me. I don't think I would ever have guessed it was made with anything other than Pilsner malt. Well, Andy, you were curious to test this out for yourself and did your own comparison. Results when we return. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew-in-a-bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew-in-a-bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Naturally, German Pils must be made with Pilsner malt. I mean, it's called Pilsner malt for a reason. While the difference in kilning between Pilsner malt and pale malt is rather slight, 2 degrees Lovibond, give or take, each is widely believed to impart unique characteristics to beer. But do they? Andy, that's what you tested out.
Yeah. So in this experiment, we're looking at 2 5-gallon batches of ostensibly German Pilsner beer. In this case, I wanted to pick the same malt producer, and I'm guessing, at least in the United States, I'm not going to find a Weyermann base malt that makes, or Weyermann pale malt. I think that's maybe an oxymoron, but I do believe it exists. It's just not in the United States. Yeah. So when with Briess, we are comparing 100% pale malt. Sometimes we say two-row, but we mean pale malt versus their Pilsner malt. And so what we did here, starting simple mash, single infusion mash at 149 Fahrenheit or 65 C for 60 minutes. And I liked to take the pH when we're playing with malt. I like to just to get a sense of where the pH is. So I took the pH about 15 minutes into each mash, and the pale malt had a pH of 5.45 versus Pilsner malt at 5.51. These are both taken at room temperature. So at mash temp, they're around 5 to 2.5.
So that makes perfect sense, right? The pale malt is kilned more. We know that higher kilning results in more acid or more acidification power, if you will.
Absolutely.
And so you would expect the pale malt to be slightly lower pH than the Pilsner malt, which is exactly what we found here. So you didn't swap the batches, Andy. That's good to know.
Nope. So and this is good. I mean, it tracks. And it's the same producer, right? Like we said earlier, we're assuming that they're going to use the same malt. We're just kilning it a little bit more. So all the process control is there. And, if you had said, I'm going to compare pale malt from one company to Pilsner malt of another company, I would say that pH is going to be wildly different and not this well correlated. But it's a good number to see.
Yeah, well, and also if you're making a comparison like that, which we've done before, and sometimes that's kind of the point of the experiment, you couldn't isolate. If it was a significant result, there'd be no way to say that it was because of the maltster or if it was because of the type of malt. In this case, again, you did both with Briess to eliminate that factor. Just a point, I'm almost certain that Briess's pale malt is 3.5 degrees Levibond and their Pils malt is 1.2 degrees Levibond. So that is a pretty big difference.
Yep.
And my guess would be that was what you were using, were those two kilned, that was the kilning of the malts you were using. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the base may have been a little lighter because they have a few different varieties, but I mean there was a difference for sure. At least a little bit about a Levibond difference. So I mean they're definitely different color, and we're going to see that as we discuss the visual aspect of this experiment in a little bit. So when both mashes were complete, I batch sparged to identical volumes of wort, and I use these Bruzillas to collect the wort into different pots and then do a batch sparge.
Yeah.
So after I've collected everything, all the wort's ready to go. We were boiling for 60 minutes, and I did a very simple hop bill: 20 grams of Sterling at 60 minutes. 28 grams of Hallertau Mittelfrüh at 30 minutes, and then 43 grams of Hallertau Mittelfrüh at 10 minutes.
Another fantastic variety for this style, by the way. I love Mittelfrüh. Yeah.
And in doing this, learning a lot about a specific hop, I think these recipes, and when we generate these kind of very simple recipes, they're great places to experiment with new hops that you've not played before because they're consistent. You're going to use them the same way in the same number of ounces or same number of grams. So, you get to see what you like the most, and hey, I really like Hallertau over this, over that. So
yeah.
After I was done boiling, I used the counterflow chiller to chill the wort down into carboys, and just to make sure both OGs ended up at 1051. So we're all straight and narrow down the middle.
So that to me, that's interesting. I've mentioned this before, and I actually got a little bit of blowback on it. People were saying that there was probably something process oriented. But when I first started brewing with bulk grains, when I first started buying grains in bulk, I would always just get from my commercial brewery buddy back then. He'd tack on a couple extra sacks and I'd pay him for them. And so they were always from the same maltster. And usually it was either Briess or Great Western. And so when I would use pale malt, I would get this OG, this very consistent OG that was slightly lower than whenever I would use Pils malt. So the fact that you nailed 1051 with both is, again, it's kind of causing me to question, maybe it was a process thing, but I used to always get slightly more efficiency from Pils malt. That doesn't seem to be the case today, and it certainly wasn't the case for you in this experiment.
Well, one thing it could be is, crushing. I do a pretty fine crush, so I think I'm getting any type of like small amount of, plumpness of the grain, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Could have an effect. So, I was good. I tend to be in these comparisons, about the same, within, at least 1 degree on the high and the refractometer. So, we're pretty close to both of them.
Yeah.
So after the worts were placed in the chamber and left for a couple hours to get down to chilling temp, my chiller doesn't work super well. It couldn't get down to the pitching temp, but their pitching temp looking at 50 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees C. I split a large starter I made just before that of Imperial Yeast L17 Harvest between the two batches. So that starter was made ahead of time with 2 pouches, and then when it was ready to go, just split into equal amounts into the fermenters. After 5 days at 50 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius, I raised the temperature up to 57 Fahrenheit or 14 degrees Celsius to finish off. Left them there for about another 2 weeks. To get that diacetyl, any off flavors, just those get eaten up and make sure it finishes out completely.
Yep.
And then we ended the beer. We're racking them into kegs. The pale malt beer ended at 1.009 finishing gravity versus the Pilsner malt of 1.011 finishing gravity. So there was a little bit of difference there.
So yeah, not a huge difference. I mean, that's only 2 specific gravity points difference, but still curious to me what happened there. I mean, you're using these Bruzillas, which are controlled mash temp, units. So that you kept both at the same temp. I would have expected the opposite. I would have expected the lighter kilned Pilsner malt, if anything, to be more attenuative than the pale malt. I'm not sure why I would expect that.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me that the pale malt finished 2 points lower. Again, I'm not sure that that's really anything to hang your hat on. It's not a huge deal, but curious no less.
Yeah. I don't have a great answer for this one. I think just 2 different vessels. It could be slight temperature differences between the 2 fermenters. Slight mash efficiency things. It's tough. I know we started the same OG, but was there some level of fermentability difference? I'm not 100% sure, but there was a measurable difference. So we just wanted to let everyone know about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then at this point, these are racked into sanitized and purged kegs, and then I let them lager a bit, for about 3 weeks just before any testing is done, so they can clean up a bit. We can get as good clarity as possible, and an even appearance and hopefully flavor. If they're all the same age. So this is about 5 weeks from grain to glass, more or less.
Yeah. Awesome.
So appearances, so it should come as no shock. They are definitely different in color. So yes, we bought the right malts. They definitely different in color. Clarity is about the same. I think they are clearing at different rates because I was sampling the beer as it was carbonating. But in general, the big takeaway in a clear glass, not a opaque glass like for the experiment, is that they look different. And I think this is the big thing we have to remember in our experiments is that we have tons of times we measure objective differences.
Yeah.
We have objectively a different finishing gravity and objectively a different color. So, if you looked at them, they're different.
Well, and we've gotten comments from people before who say, well, but, vision, appearance is something that you should give to people, allow people to use to determine if they can tell the beers apart. Where's the fun in that? I mean, if you can obviously tell the difference based on the way they looked, which unless you're colorblind, you absolutely could in this experiment. They look different. It's not crazy, but one definitely looks more like a Pilsner. The other looks more like a blonde ale, right?
And that's going to set your expectation. That's why doing it blind in opaque glasses, I think, is critical for specifically this experiment.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, this experiment was brewed recently. It was during the whole COVID-19 thing, so we were unable to collect data from real participants, which means we used our COVID-19 protocol, which involves the brewer of the beer pouring one of the samples into 2 cups of the same color, and then the other sample into 2 other cups of the same color. We mark the bottom of 2 of the cups so we know which is what sample is in which, and then you randomize those 4 cups, pull 3 of them out, and then perform your triangle test. When I do these, I have my wife or my kids help me with it, so I'm not biased in which cups to pick. We all have our approach, but that is the approach that we used for this one, again, because of COVID-19. And we do that 10 times, and then we run a triangle. We run the statistic to see if we're significant or not.
Yep. So we did 10. I did 10 trials of this. We would need 7 to have a significant result, and in this case, it was only 4, so not significant. I could not tell these apart, which I think was amazing. Because we're so diehard about using Pilsner malt for Pilsners. I did not taste difference. For me, this beer had a great hop aroma. The halotime came out great. They're light, crisp. It was just great. I think if anything, I was going to just up the water profile a little bit next time. But these are great. And if color was no object, then obviously pale malt would be easier. It's a little cheaper. It's more available, and no one would be the wiser. Now, if I had served you the darker one and called it a Pilsner, you would have laughed me out of the room. So,
well, let's talk about this for a minute. One of the things, yes, we are not happy that we have to do, single participant, ourselves, unblinded, fully aware data collection right now during COVID-19. Yes. It is the best. It is a worst case scenario, and we've been able to figure this out so that we can keep producing content. That's the truth of the matter. Mm-hmm. You would expect that a person, the dude who brewed these beers, who knew everything about the variable that was being tested, who had sampled the beers along the way, if there's going to be a person who can tell these beers apart, you were it, Andy, and you could not do it. This is to me, now this does corroborate past experiment findings with other styles of beer, but these were German Pils. You can't get a simpler style of beer where you would expect to taste the difference between Pils and pale malt. And the brewer of the beers couldn't do it. That speaks volumes to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I know everything going in, and we'll talk a little about maybe why this happened, but it's important to remember that you're making beer for yourself, and I think the experiments when we do them, with 20 people, it's a lot of pallets. You get the data is just I would say more robust in a sense, is that you're getting many different people's opinions, so you're getting that just general thing where Andy could be blind to a certain thing or not. But now I also have knowledge, right? So there's this, I'm blind to some things, flavors, but I'm also have knowledge on my side that I know that 2 of these are identical and 1 is not. And I can't tell them apart. It's amazing to me. And it should teach you, or it does teach me something about what I can and can't taste. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And that's the argument from the other perspective, is that when you serve it to a panel of tasters, you're getting different palates. And that's a good thing. It could just be that you're not sensitive to that just sounds so stupid to me, but it could be that you're just not sensitive to the difference between pale and Pils malt. One of the things that kind of goes through my mind as we're talking about these results and the fact that you could not distinguish a 100% Pils malt beer from a 100% pale malt beer is the possibility that all of the other similarities, the fact that you got these from the same maltster, Briess, is it possible that that's what made them so similar? That just, arguably the only difference was the kilning rate, the kilning level.
Yep.
Could it be that if you compared, Briess pale malt, which is a very popular pale malt, to Weyermann's Pils malt, which is a very popular Pils malt, maybe then you would have tasted that difference that people would expect. But still, man, the fact that you couldn't do it in this, I mean, I've been hearing a lot of people lately who are kind of getting back into the West Coast IPA thing, who are using Pils malt as their base malt in a West Coast IPA because they're looking to get that lighter color. They want it to have that appearance of refreshing, crisp, all of that. And they're getting away with using Pils malt and thinking that they're getting a flavor difference as well. Maybe it really is just a color difference.
I think it is. I think this modern day and age, especially how we look at beer and how we consume beer, not only by drinking it, by looking at marketing and advertising and stuff, and seeing in color matters. How it looks in the glass matters, and so this is just another tool in your toolbox of and what you want to get out of it. Again, this is a one result. This is just my experience with the base malt. I'm not that surprised that beers that have a same producer, not definitely difference in color, but similar. They're similar enough. And I think you're right. And I would imagine if we ever do something like this again, where we're going to get to the flagship base malt in the United States versus the flagship Pilsner malt in say Germany or Belgium or something like that. Those I would have hoped to have a difference, but maybe not. I'm not sure. The other thing here that I think also goes a little bit into it is these beers are fairly hoppy, so potentially that's covering up some parts of it. So you would have to then say, okay, let's remove the hops, but I think one I'd say ding, or if that was a conversation if someone wanted to have about how would you detect a difference? Well, now we're going to limit ourselves to maybe two beer styles, like cream ale and then like American light lager. Then we compare everything. So it's not really fair to say like, oh, well, it's the hops that are covering up. Like, well, okay, well, in these cases, when you use hops, which is going to be like 80% of the beers, they're going to have some hop character to them that you won't taste it. Okay, well, great. Now we know. Okay, cool. So
couldn't agree with you more. So, in thinking about implications of these findings, I think there are some positives here. So let's say you are an apartment brewer who wants to save some money, so you decide to go bulk, but you just don't have the room to store 5 sacks of different grain. Maybe buy Pilsner malt and use that. That'd be the route that I took. I wouldn't use, because I'm still kind of married to Pils being made with Pilsner malt. What I would do is I would use Pilsner malt for all of my other beers as the base for my stout, as the base for my blonde ale, I would go that route because it looks like you can get away with it. And I really don't think, as you move up in the darkness scale in terms of beer color, you're also kind of moving up in character scale and flavor scale. You're not going to get a huge contribution from the Pils malt anyway. So you might as well just use that as your base malt. And then you don't have to worry about having pale and Pils malt. Personally, I still keep both around because that's just what I do, and I'm kind of, I guess, a traditionalist in that respect. But hey, this does, I was thinking about it. I told my little story at the end of the last segment. These results confirm that as well, right? I could not, there was no way I would have been able to tell if the Pilsner that I made way back when with 95% pale malt wasn't Pils malt. It tasted like a Pilsner to me.
Yeah, and I same thing you just said, Marsh. Before I was doing Brulosity stuff, I would just have a bag of Weyermann. That's my base malt. That's all I ever used because I just liked it. I liked the character. I think there's also a little bit of nostalgia. You like the brand and things like that, of course, and you're willing to pay the couple extra bucks, that kind of thing. And so, but now this makes you examine and makes you think, okay, what am I really getting at when I look at base malt? Now I would hope, and I have right now, I have an English ale on tap that's 100% Maris Otter. I could taste that Maris Otter, and I really think that, okay, that'd be the difference, right? How many Lovabond do you really need between base malts to see a difference? And I think if we really drilled into it and did the experiments, I think you would find that there's more similarities within a brand or manufacturer, and there's more differences with different manufacturers, right? And that's just the nature of malting. You're malting literal tons and tons and tons of malt. And so the differences are going to be more in those production ways and less within the company, in my opinion.
That makes sense to me. You would still think, though, at least I do, that if you're selling two different products, that they're going to be noticeably different. And another thought I had is perhaps that if you were to brew a Helles export beer with even more of that malt, then those differences would shine even more. But who knows? I mean, the results of this one are fascinating nonetheless. Now, we did get, obviously, some reader comments on this one. We'll start with one from Thomas Hammond, who says, is there a chance a taste difference in the malt profile could have been detected with maybe 25 IBU? Andy, you mentioned earlier about the beers being somewhat hoppy. That's just a part of German Pils, is it has that noble hop character. Yeah, 41 IBU, which I believe is what your beer was at, is on the higher end of the bitterness scale for German Pils, according to the BJCP, but it's still within reason. And I'll tell you, I was talking with some folks up in Yakima when they're doing their single hop beers. Their hop, they want to make single hop beer to get kind of a good sensory on a new hop or something. They're bittering to 35 to 40 IBU as well. I mean, that's kind of the standard. Would it have made the malt difference more pronounced? I'm not really sure. But like you said earlier, I feel like if you're going to limit it to, if you're going to make these beers that no one would ever actually make in real life, well, then what good do the results do for us?
Yeah, and you see this if you read academic papers. Cade's interviewed people where they make kind of a generic base malt that would, base wort that no one would drink.
Right.
Now they're actually coming around and doing, okay, we'll do something with some hops in it, something that's more practical. Now this will skew the results, but you want to be in the neighborhood, right? I don't think it makes sense, especially for us where we're so hedonistic in our brewing. We're going to make something we're going to want to drink. Right. It should be in the wheelhouse of what we want to drink and not just, I've made 35 IBU beer, we should bake something that at least goes to some style that's in the range of being interesting for the style, of course.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, all right. Next comment comes from Jürgen Deforn. He says, Pilsner malt, pale ale malt. First of all, here in Belgium, Pilsen MD is 1.4 to 1.8 degrees Lovibond. Weyermann's standard Pilsner malt is between 1.4 and 2.1 degrees Lovibond. For me, the distinction made between Pilsner malt and pale malt is artificial. It does not have any meaning except in the color of the end product. Weyermann has extra pale premium Pilsner malt, which is between 1.2 and 1.8 degrees Lovibond, which makes the Dingemans Pilsen MD seem about the same product. And a whole range of beers are brewed here with Pilsen malt, both bottom and top fermented styles, so lagers and ales. The main reason probably being that Pilsner malt is cheaper to make, less energy needed to kiln it. One well-known beer is made with even lighter malt, Duvel, which uses a malt kiln to their specs. And then you have pale ale malts, which where Dingemans supplies one with a color of 3.8 degrees Lovibond, Weyermann between 2.5 and 3.3 degrees Lovibond, and Simpson's between 2.2 and 3 degrees Lovibond. To make things a bit more confusing even, there's a low color Maris Otter, which is kilned to Pilsner specs, but which is a traditional pale ale barley. I had to include this comment because you're going to went into some details there that I thought were really interesting.
That was awesome. No, that's really, the energy aspect is I didn't even think about that, is that it's actually a little more energy efficient to do the lighter kilning. And I'd be really interested to play with a low color Maris, because I wonder how much the flavor is going to come in as another kind of base malt experiment. Because, I think when people think of Maris Otter, they think of flavor first of all, right? So that's really cool. And it's fun to see that there's so many different things. That reminds me of, what's kind of we're seeing in the United States market of craft malt and having different specs and having different things and all these different producers. So that's super cool to hear. I mean but it also makes sense. Again, I did not perceive a difference, but it was clear there's different color, and when you want color to dictate how the beer is being marketed, then that's going to be a factor in your base malt choice. So
color matters. I mean that you've got to accept that. But what, one of the Jürgen's comment here really makes me interested. What I would love to do, and I don't know if it will ever be possible because maltsters are going to stick with the variety of barley grain that they grow. But I would love for the same maltster to produce the same malt, so a Pils malt kiln to the same Lovibond, for example, but with two different varieties of barley. That would be fascinating, because I have to wonder how much of the character of a malt, right, of a barley malt, comes from the variety of barley that they're growing. I mean, it seems to me, having tried, Sugar Creek malt and Root Shoot malt and Mecca Grade malt, all these craft maltsters who are using these different varieties, it seems to me that it does have an impact. I mean, so. Absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing with hops, right? Hops have so much to do with the plant themselves, and then how they're treated, how they're grown, how they're cultivated, everything like that. We forget. I think that, malt still our agricultural product. It's going to have differences, and usually I think malt houses get tuned up for a certain variety of malt, so they can understand how long it's going to take to germinate and everything like that, and they get used to it. So yeah, it'd be very cool for the smaller guys. Then again, it becomes less available to us if they're going to do it as a one-off. It'd be a good experiment, but it may not be practical. But it's still cool. It would be a cool experiment nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. Next comment comes from John, who says, "I love this experiment. I'll be making a fake pills with pale malt, Saats, and Hallertau hops fermented with ale yeast. I think I'll set IBU around 30 and mash low to make sure it's crisp and dry. I wonder if anyone will know it's an ale." John, I would just call that a blonde ale. That would be but that's the thing. Again, you could go into the weeds in talking about styles and what defines a specific style.
Yeah. I think color. The previous comment was about Duvel being very light in color. I mean, it also has a ton of dextrose or sugar in it as well, so it really gets very little of its flavor. A lot of that is yeast driven and malt driven and stuff. But I think that I've made beer styles that are light in color, light in flavor, that were still ale fermented. Specifically using 3470 at ale temperatures is a common one.
Yeah.
But for a lot of those things, also hop driven, right? I don't think I would associate German Pilsner if it wasn't using like a Tettnang, Hallertau. There's not many other hops I would use in place of it. So call it what you want. I don't think people are much more wiser unless they're really going to be nitpicky about it. So
yeah, unless you're actually like bragging about the style that you made, I think people are probably just going to drink your beer and probably tell you to start a brewery. I mean, that's
exactly
that's what our friends do, right? Final comment comes from Tracy Hamilton. She says it may be that the higher sulfur yeast, the Pilsner malt will show that with a higher sulfur yeast, the Pilsner malt will show more sulfur character, since lightly kiln malts have higher levels of S-methylmethionine, which is SMM. That would have been my expectation. I think that's a really interesting comment because you did not perceive a difference in sulfur character.
No. And I got very little, if any. I think I got actually none in this case. The fermentations, they're on the cold side, but I do warm them up a bit. Sometimes, especially Harvest or its derivatives, they can throw that, but tend to be that I let it sit warm long enough. Let it go to 50 and then rise it up to, more like 68, 70 degrees sometimes even in some of my batches. So it really all goes away and it's not left in the beer at all. So, but if you go do traditional lagering, if I had done in this case a more 50 degree Fahrenheit and then actually go to cold lagering temperatures, if I had the gear for that, maybe that's the case. It's very possible that residual, above, if both the SMM, DMS, and the yeast together combined to go over flavor threshold, then maybe it would have shown up in the panels.
Yeah, makes sense to me. It's easy to kind of lose sight of the fact that DMS is a sulfur compound, right? A dimethyl sulfide, and so that higher levels of that, or higher levels of its precursor SMM, is one of the things that people say as being a contributor to pale lagers having that sulfur character. And the fact you didn't get it just makes these findings all the more interesting to me. Well, that does bring us to the end of this episode. Any last words on the base malts used to make German pills, Andy?
I think for me, I still take appearance to be a big part of it, and I'm not normally bringing people opaque glasses and testing their ability to distinguish differences. So, I think when the style calls for it, I'm going to be using Pilsner malt. I'll probably be using Weyermann. Let's be serious. But I'm not going to also worry too much about it if I can, especially maybe blend two malts. Say I only have half a sack of each. I need to use I need enough malt. So I'm going to be a lot less worried about what flavor impact's going to occur, because I'm actually in this style really looking towards the hops to provide some of that flavor and less the malt. I think if we did this again, we're going for like a very, very plain beer, maybe it really matters, but I'm a lot less worried about it these days.
I'm right there with you. I will keep using Pilsner malt for Pilsners and pale malt for my ales for the most part, because I have the room to store it all. And so, but honestly, if I couldn't, and I would just pick up a sack of Pilsner and use it for everything. So that's kind of my take. Well, don't forget to check out our new podcast, The Brew Lab, where host Cade Job takes you into the lab with real brewing scientists to discuss fascinating research they've done on our favorite beverage. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no